Now we're facing what appears to be quite a simple scene of the Blyth estuary. It might get a little bit distorted in the camera and look further away than it actually is. Now it's a very windy, blustery day, cold but not unbearably cold. The wind is going to be the biggest factor. At this time of year, in January in the UK, there's really very little heat in the sun, but the wind should dry the washers. I'm in the shade, and unfortunately I'm not out of the wind. Now, the most important thing to get right in a subject like this is not necessarily the horizon, but the far distant waterline, which is of course horizontal. Too many people, when they do this sort of subject, do the horizon too high and they lose the sense of distance. They also tend to paint or draw the land rather than the shape of the water. And if you think about the water lays flat, so that far distant shoreline, water's edge, is horizontal. There may be slight perspective on it, but it's so minimal that it's not worth sacrificing the sort of level horizontalness to indicate that it's water. Now my first thought is, where am I going to put it on the piece of paper? And let's have it fairly low. I've anchored my easel with my painting bag, and I just hope it remains fairly stable. The drawing board wobbles a bit because it acts a bit like a sail. So let's just get that far distant waterline in, nice and horizontal. I can wedge my finger in the bottom edge of my drawing board to ensure it's horizontal. The only little man-made structure that's obvious is not actually a church. I think it's a sort of a pig hopper just on the skyline. Well, if we indicate that, and then the land sort of drops away and then rises, comes across here. There's little lumpy bits of distant trees. Now I'm going to move this tree. There's indication in the sun of some fields. These trees on the right in the shoreline, they're worth exaggerating a bit because they break the skyline, which brings it forward and adds to a sense of distance. So let's get this near shore done, which is almost a series of steps, but keep it horizontal. Don't put any curves in it. It's really just a thin sliver of light of the River Blyth, and then there's some marshes coming into the river, and then the fields here. Now this is the tree that I'm sort of talking about. Let's exaggerate it a bit and have it really up here so it breaks this distant skyline. Now it stops the eye wandering around sort of aimlessly along the horizontals, because obviously this picture is very much made of horizontals, and we need to have some sort of contrast for that levelness, if I can put it like that. And then we've got a series of quite bright greens and scrubbiness, but I don't want to draw too much attention to the foreground, because when I stand here my attention goes across the river, which is the light, so I'm drawn naturally to the light, and perhaps the little man-made structure on the horizon. And if I add too much detail here, it'll drag the viewer's attention to somewhere that I don't naturally look when I'm standing here. I think that's about as much drawing as I would do, actually, because it's fairly sort of simple washes and very much a sky painting. Now, as normal practice, I've primed my palette with nice fresh juicy paint before I left home, so all I've got to do is open the palette lid and I can set to work. I think this is a painting that I'll need to address the sky first. Cobalt and a little bit of Windsor blue. I don't always like doing the sky first because you can sort of tend to frighten yourself with the paint, and as you can see, it's so windy, the paint sort of blowing off the brush onto the paper. I've got a fingerless mitten on my left hand side, on my left hand, where I'm sort of holding the palette, which is metal and therefore stays quite cold. Bit of movement in the sky from this very strong southwesterly wind, so we try and indicate that with the direction of the brush strokes. Cobalt and a little bit of cadmium red. Too much, as usual when you're painting in quite trying conditions. Just put a bit of raw sienna with that. You tend to get a bit heavy-handed. Let's put a bit more raw sienna with it. Get this bit of grey in between the patches of blue. I'm not going to worry about covering the whole of the paper. These little white flecks which are sort of accidentally left, mainly because of the conditions really. Bit of cadmium red, very dilute, for some lighter colour there. A little bit of more blue. Try and maintain the sort of movement of the sky. Lighter blue as you get down towards the horizon, and then some more of the grey. I'm not using a particularly big brush, simply because each area is fairly small actually, and a bigger brush can cover too much of the surface too quickly. Let's have a little bit of blue there, just a general impression of the sky. Just cover that. The bits of white, in addition to sort of lifting the sky, they've just put a little bit of a litter in with that. In addition to lifting the sky, they've got to contribute to the picture in the sense of giving the liveliness and direction of the brush strokes. I'm going to take the wash right over the far distant horizon and then just drag it horizontally over the water. If we can leave a little bit of white flecks in the water, although I can't really see any, that will help explain to the viewer this is water I'm painting. And despite the temperature, it's a bright sunny day when the sun peeps through the clouds, and therefore it's reflecting nicely off the water. A little bit of raw sienna. There's some light here. Let's just put in one stroke of some lighter colour here, and leave that just to let that dry out. It shouldn't take too long to dry in this wind. What I might do is just raise it a little bit more horizontal so the wind goes across it to dry it off. Now let's set about the distant shore. When you squint at it, it's fairly dark. Now there's a great tendency for people to paint things in the distance pale, partly because they've been told to, and partly because in some lighting conditions it is pale. But if it's dark, then paint it get the tones right, because it's that's going to contribute to giving the general impression of the light and atmosphere of the day. What we can do is to push it back is alter the temperature of the colours and make them a little bit cooler, a little bit bluer, in other words, and green. Keep off the yellows and reds unless you particularly want to make an accent, or perhaps there's a light field that's caught by the sun. Now we'll work this ultramarine, bit of light red, we'll start across here. Let's put a bit of viridian and burnt umber with that. Just do little bits at a time and try and finish it off as well as you can, so that you don't end up going back. That's the important thing. A bit more blue. Every time I go back to the colours, I dip into something slightly different. There's the bluishness. Add a little bit of raw sienna. We can afford to just make that a little bit warmer, and then carry on. Green. Don't have any holes in this. It's not the sky, it's the solid ground, and therefore holes will take away how solid this is. A little bit of lighter green across there. Back to the sort of bluey distant trees on the horizon, oh sorry, on the skyline I should say. Keep looking to see any little differences, otherwise you soon run out of ideas, whereas looking at nature will supply the variety that makes it interesting. Lighter green here, because I'm going to do a little bit of over painting and pull out some of the hedgerows here, but it's going to be quite a fine tone problem. Quite light here. Let's put a bit of raw sienna, because these trees are going to come in front of this, so I'm going to lighten that behind that, and then back to the sort of duller green here. We want to keep that water's edge nice and straight. Just fill up those little holes. And then viridian and burnt sienna and a bit of raw sienna to indicate some of these marshes. I have to hold the drawing board here with my left hand to stop it wobbling. I could make that tiny little bit darker against the as I see it against it's the River Blyth in Suffolk, looking towards Blythborough. A bit more paint. Get this edge here, viridian and a bit of burnt sienna. There's some burnt sienna, fairly stiffish mixture, with a bit of ultramarine to take some of the heat out of it. And we've got a bank of trees, quite fuzzy really. Again, they just break the skyline. Now we'll just leave that to dry for a little while, and then in the second part of this video we'll add some detail to the background and finish off this middle distance and foreground.